Network and with IREC on today's event. So my name is Eleanor Flynn and I'm the Director of the Centre for Disability Law and Policy at the University of Galway. And I'm here today to talk about how we can all get ready and prepare for a very important part of the reporting process under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that part of the process that I'll be talking about today focuses on what's called the list of issues. So I'll explain what that is in more detail as we go through this brief presentation. So to set the scene about what we're discussing today, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what the convention is. I'm sure most of you here are very familiar with the convention already, but some people might be new to the convention. So I'll just share a little bit about how it works and what Ireland's role under the convention is. And then I'll be outlining the steps in the reporting process and how countries have to come before the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and account for their progress or lack thereof on disability rights and enter into a dialogue with the committee about that. And then I'll come to talk about what's happening this year with respect to Ireland and the committee and why it matters and how everyone who's here and many people who are not here but may want to take part in that process to hold government accountable for what it has done and what it has not done and what it has yet to do on disability rights. So let's begin by talking about the UN Convention itself, the UNCRPD for short. So as you all know, this is an international agreement on disability rights that was adopted in 2006. And the convention is structured with different sections. So the first couple of articles of the convention are what are called the general provisions. So these set out things like general principles and obligations that states have to follow in all of their actions, whether that's making laws, creating policies, or implementing and monitoring those policies with respect to the rights of disabled people. The next part of the convention goes into specific rights. So it starts with equality and non-discrimination in Article 5, and then it goes on into all of the areas of specific rights, whether that's education, independent living, the right to legal capacity, the right to not be deprived of liberty. All of those specific rights are then covered in the main body, the longest part of the convention. The convention does also, however, talk about specific groups of disabled people who have particular concerns and rights that relate to them. So those specific groups are disabled women and disabled children, and those are covered specifically in Articles 6 and 7 of the convention. And then at the very end of the convention, the last few articles talk about specific obligations that states have, that countries must do things like collect data, collect statistics and information to measure how much progress they're making on respecting the rights of disabled people. And they must ensure that in their international cooperation or the aid that we give, development aid to other countries, that we are doing that in a way that respects the human rights of disabled people. And in monitoring the convention within our own country, and this is part of the role of IREC, which you'll hear more about later, that they are following the rules of the convention in making sure that disabled people can participate in all aspects of the monitoring and implementation of the convention within the country. So I won't go into the articles themselves in greater detail for now, but I'm happy to talk more about that if people have specific questions. What I want to talk about now is specifically what Ireland's role is under the convention and how Ireland has fulfilled that role to date. So at the moment, we know, of course, that Ireland ratified the convention in 2018. And by ratifying, that means that Ireland is agreeing to uphold the convention and follow the convention, and it is bound by it in international law. Being bound in international law is one thing, but that doesn't mean that the convention automatically becomes part of our law in Ireland. So unfortunately, the convention has not yet been incorporated into Irish law. And so there isn't a Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in Ireland that people could rely upon in the courts, for example, if they were making claims. We might see that at some point in the future, but probably not. So it's important for us to understand that while the state has ratified the convention, that just means that it's agreed to follow it in the international sphere. And while that does involve implementing it in Ireland, there is no direct route in Ireland for people to claim that the state has violated the convention. The government submitted its first report on its progress under the convention, which it's required to do. It submitted that to the UN committee, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And that report was handed in 2021. So that brings me on to the role of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this committee is comprised of 18 independent experts. Those experts are elected by states who have ratified the convention. So now that Ireland has ratified, it has been able to participate in the election of members to the UN committee. Of the 18 experts currently on the committee, there are 14 of them who are themselves disabled people. So there have always been a strong majority of disabled people on the committee from its very inception. And that has, I think, been very important in how the committee has gone about its work, and particularly how the committee has engaged with disabled people on the ground in the different countries when they come to look at that country's human rights record on disabled people. So the committee meets in Geneva in Switzerland for 2 sessions every year, and those sessions are to check states' progress in putting the convention into practice. It also makes recommendations to states on what should change, and it has a number of ways of doing that and a number of ways of exploring what's happening within specific countries that I'm not going to get into detail on today, because today I want to focus on what's happening this year in the cycle of the reporting process. So we begin with the state report, which, as we've talked about, has been written by the Irish government already. In 2021, it was submitted to the UN. So we've ticked off that step already. And now we're approaching the second step on this chart, which is the list of issues. So the list of issues is a series of questions that the UN committee writes to the government, having read the state report. So when the committee reads the report, it may have questions. The things might look very good on paper. The committee knows that that's not always the reality on the ground. So they may want more information about specific things the state has said it is planning to do, or it has already done, or it's in the process of completing. And there's always a lag in time between the state report and the list of issues. So in our case now, it's been 4 years. So quite a lot of things can have changed in that time. So the committee may ask for more up-to-date information from the government about what it is doing on all of the articles of the convention. When the committee is formulating that list of questions, or list of issues as it's formally known, it can accept inputs from civil society organizations. So that includes disabled people's organizations, as Jackie mentioned, and also other kinds of organizations that are non-governmental organizations. IREC as well can also make a submission at this stage to the UN committee, and will be doing so, as you'll hear about later on. So this is quite an important point, because the committee is eager, as you will also hear from Theresia Degener in her role, having formerly been a member and chair of the committee. The committee wants to be well informed when it writes its questions to the government. It wants to have a good understanding of what the key issues on the ground are at the time that this list of questions is created. So this is where all of us come in, and it's really important that we can provide that context and up-to-date information to the committee, so that when it writes the questions to the government, it's asking the right questions. Once that list of written questions or list of issues is submitted back to the Irish government will have some time to reply, and will write a written reply that will answer the committee's questions. And the committee will read that reply. And then the next step in the process is the dialogue. So this is the part that takes place between the government and the UN committee, where they meet in Geneva and they discuss what has happened overall, in this timeline, they discuss how the government is achieving the rights of disabled people in practice. They ask more questions. The government has to answer those questions in person during this session. And of course, this session is also open to disabled people's organizations and other kinds of organizations who can attend and give suggestions during that session as well to the UN committee members about what they would like to see the state challenged on, what kinds of things they really feel are priorities for them. At the end of that dialogue, then, the committee writes its concluding observations. So these are the, final recommendations to the state, having reviewed all of the evidence, having listened to the state's side of things, having listened to the voices of people on the ground about what's really going on. The committee comes up with a final set of recommendations about what they would like to see changed by the state. And then a few years later, we repeat the cycle all over again. So this is a kind of a continuous process, but we're just in the first round of that process now when it comes to Ireland. So there is actually a follow-up procedure that I didn't put on this slide as well, where if the committee has very serious concerns, it can ask the state for more information within 1 year of the concluding observations on things that maybe are very serious violations of the rights of disabled people, where they're concerned there's not enough progress being made. So that is an option that the committee has as well. It's not always used, but it can be used. So that brings us to what's happening this year. And we know now that by the end of June, we have not been given an exact date at the end of June, but we have been told by the UN committee that by the end of June, organisations will have to send their submissions to the committee with their suggestions of what kinds of questions they would like the committee to ask the Irish government. And they have to include within that the reasons why they want those questions asked, any evidence or examples or information that would explain to the committee why it's important to ask that question. And then the committee will read all of that information and write its final list of questions to the Irish government in September this year. So if you've heard all of that and you think, okay, this is a good opportunity to have our say and to tell the UN about the things we're very concerned about in Ireland, and you were interested in writing a submission, these are some things you need to think about when you're doing that. You need to provide some information about your organization. You need to explain, what it does. What is it, a national organization? Is it an international organization? What groups does it represent or work with? How does it do its work? All of that kind of basic information. You also have to include an executive summary, which can be no longer than 1 page. In the main part of your submission, you have to make sure that you are linking the points you're making to specific articles of the convention. So that's where it's very important to know the detail of the convention articles and what they say, and also the ways in which the UN committee has interpreted those articles or given guidance to states on those articles, so that we understand this from the perspective of the committee and we put it in terms that the committee will relate to. Very, very important to include in the submission the questions. What questions do you want the committee to ask the Irish government? Because ultimately the list of issues is essentially a list of questions. And those questions must be based on things that the state has claimed that it is doing or has said that it is trying to make progress on, or things that have been covered in the state report in some way. So it's worth reading through again that report from 2021 that the government submitted, and then either challenging the information in that report where it might not be fully accurate or where it might no longer be up to date, given that we're now 4 years later. And things that the government may have said they were doing in 2021 may still be no further along the process. And that's important for them to be held accountable for that. So that's the kind of structure and approach that I would advise if you're planning to do a submission. The other important information to remember is the deadline, which we don't have the final actual date of, but we have been told is the end of June, which is sooner than we think. And especially if groups want to gather information and put submissions together, it takes time. And a lot of organizations that are run by disabled people are entirely run by volunteers, don't have a lot of spare time to be creating this kind of evidence base for these submissions. And I do want to say as well that, of course, you know, this is not the only way we should be thinking and talking about holding the government accountable. Obviously, it's very important to use all the means at our disposal, you know, through the media, through direct action, through litigation, through the courts. But not all of those means are open to everyone. And this is another tool that we have where we can at least bring to light the things that are important to people on the ground in Ireland. So I don't want to maybe overestimate the impact that writing a submission to the list of issues might have, but at the same time, I think it's one of our chances to hold government accountable in an international forum. And of course, the Irish government, like most governments, wants to be known as a leader in human rights, wants to, you know, have a good reputation on the international stage at the UN. And so, you know, this is a process that the government will engage with and will take seriously. So it is an opportunity for us in that respect. We do also have a word limit for the list of issues. The maximum word limit is 10,700 words. Of course, submissions that are shorter, I think, are always welcome from the committee because they will have a lot of material to read for each country. So the more succinctly that we can get our points across, the better it is for everybody. Documents must be submitted in either Microsoft Word or rich text format for the committee, and they can be submitted by email to the email address that's on the screen, which is crpd-ohchr@un.org. So I think another final point I would make about why we can engage with this process is that there is a lot to be gained by collaborating and coming together around something like Ireland's record, Ireland's human rights record, and Ireland's record before the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We don't yet know which exact committee member will be responsible for leading the questioning on Ireland. We will know that, I'm sure, before the session happens in Geneva in September, where they're writing the list. There are lots of ways in which groups can participate, not only by doing the written submission, but I think that is a very important first step. There's also the opportunity to do a verbal briefing to the committee during the session. There is a formal process where groups have to register in order to do that, but that can be really valuable as well. And all of the committee members have particular issues that are important to them. So there are ways in which you can do research on issues that are a priority for you and identify what committee member might be most interested in those issues. And a lot of them have their contact information listed as part of their CVs on the UN website, and it's possible to just get in touch directly and share information with them that way as well. It is indeed even possible to be physically present in Geneva during the pre-sessional working group, which is happening in September. But of course, a lot of groups don't have the funding or the means to achieve that. So that's why I mention all these different routes, because it's important for us to think about all the ways that we can have an impact on this process. And hopefully by collaborating and working together, we can have the maximum impact that we would like to see on this process. I will be talking later on again about some more ways in which people can get support with writing their submissions. But at this stage, I just wanted to give the basic information on the process. And I will shortly be handing over to Theresia Degener, who is going to share with us her very valuable insights and experience from being a member of the committee and being indeed the chairperson of the committee on what is most valuable to committee members in this submission process to the list of issues. So with that, I'll end my presentation here and I will hand over to Professor Theresia Degener. So Theresia, we need you to turn on your microphone so that we can hear you.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance to sharing with you my experiences as a member of the committee from 2011 to 2018. And the last 2 years, as Eleanor said, well, I had the opportunity to be the chair of the committee. So I wonder why this is not working. Yeah. As Eleanor has already told you, this is about the state party reports, and that is one of 6 monitoring tools of the committee. Others are individual communications, inquiries, general comments, days of general discussions and statements. And I don't think we have time to go into that. I just wanted to say that this is one of the 6 monitoring tools, the state party reporting process, which the committee has, and it is the most important. It is the most important tool or the instrument the committee has in order to check whether a member state fulfills its obligations under the CRPD. And Eleanor has already told you about the reporting cycle, which starts with the state party report, then comes the list of issues, then the state has the opportunity to give a response to the list of issues. Then we have the constructive dialogue in Geneva. Then that finishes after 2 days with concluding observations, and then there is a follow-up process. And that is the reporting cycle when the governments give their first state party report, and then there come periodic state party reports after 4 years. They have a different cycle, but that is not the issue of today. How can DPOs or organizations of persons with disabilities, also DPOs or OPDs, involved in that process? One way is to write an alternative report called also shadow reports, and many countries or many NGOs, DPOs do that. And I have to say at this point already, the information from civil society as well as the information from national human rights institutes are the most important information the committee relies on. Most of the time, the governments, when they submit their state party report, they try to make a good impression on the committee, but also on the international arena in general. And they say we fulfill our obligations under the CRPD because we do this and that and that. Often this information is only half of what is true, or sometimes it's also a big lie, and that needs to be corrected by the information given from NGOs like disabled persons organizations. So alternative reporting is what many countries do, but it is not necessary. It's voluntary to write an alternative report, also a submission on the list of issues of the country before the committee adopts the list of issues, which is a list of questions based on the state party report to the government. And that is another way to work with the committee. Especially, it is important to work with country rapporteurs. In the last years, the committee has changed its procedure here by not only adopting one country rapporteur, but most often they adopt 2 or 3, sometimes 3 country rapporteurs. And these country rapporteurs will play a major role in the constructive dialogue. So later in September in Geneva, because most of the time the other committee members, as far as I have understood the new procedure, do not intervene anymore, but it is mainly the country rapporteurs who do the speaking in the constructive dialogue, together, of course, with the government delegations and the human rights institutes also have a space in this constructive dialogues, not the civil society. Civil society can come and listen and sit in, and they can talk in the breaks to the committee members, but also there is some time which is not public, but beforehand there is what we call a briefing of the committee. And that's when DPOs are given time to brief the committee in Geneva on before the constructive dialogue takes place, and also before the list of issues are adopted. And so attending the constructive dialogue is very important. And also you have to understand that the committee members have to deal with a lot of country reports. In my time, when I had one session in Geneva, which usually lasted for 4 to 5 weeks, we had we worked on about 5 to 6 countries, and each committee members had to read about 1,500 pages of state party reports and background information. And that was not including the information coming from civil society. Or very few of that was, it was basically what the government presented. So you can imagine that it is a lot of information the committee members have to take in. And that's why it is important not only to send a written submission, but also to come to Geneva, talk to the committee members, and remind them what is the most important issue in Ireland, because they have to in a very short period of time, read a lot of information and try to make decisions on a lot of informations. And so it is very important to brief the committee once again. And when you brief the committee, you bring another 1 page with you, which you disseminate to the committee members and remind them, here, these are the most important issues we want you to address. So the submissions to the committee, and now I'm talking about the written submissions, you will now prepare, I think, until the end of June. The formal requirements are written down in the rules of procedures and in the working methods of the committee. You will find that on the website, but I think Eleanor has already wonderfully summarized the most important formal requirements. That is the word limit, the word software you have to use, and so on. What is also very important is that the report or your submission you submit to Geneva is a coalition submission. So whatever, if there is a coalition of DPOs, you should state that, because that's what this committee take more seriously than a submission of a single DPO. You also should relate to the state body report and of course to the articles of the CRPD, and that helps the committee members most. If you say Ireland has written in paragraph 23 on page 18 relating to Article 5, this and that, and this is not true, or this is only half the truth, or we would like you to acknowledge that in addition to the information given by the government, this is also important to take into account. You need to reference evidence. Evidence could be newspaper articles, it could be court decisions, it could be anecdotes, written interviews. You should reference research, and that is what impresses committee members, and make clear proposals for a list of issues, the dialogue, and then also later for the concluding observations. If you really give a text to the committee saying, we would like you to ask this question, and then quote, write down that question. It's what committee members like, even if they might change the wording slightly. You should also be ready to prioritize, because time is short. The constructive dialogue is only 2 days, and that means 3 hours in the afternoon, and then another full day the following days. And that's, so you have altogether, I think, a couple of hours for the constructive dialogue. Then you should, in the briefing, the committee will ask you, what are the most, name us the 3 most important topics you want us to make in this constructive dialogue. Be ready to give these 3 topics or 3 issues. What kind of research has impact in alternative reports by coalitions of NGOs? And also, if you give either in this alternative report or in the submissions information, whether the government has consulted you in writing their own report, or whether they have not consulted you. Also, give the committee information on whether the government has given you funding for writing your own alternative report or coming to Geneva. Many governments do that and say this is part of our duty under Article 4.3 or under Article 33.3. And I think the committee has the legal opinion that it is so, that the government should support alternative reports, the submissions, and also attending the session in Geneva by giving money to the NGOs and their partners. If you cite UN reports and studies, is very helpful. Amicus curiae briefs, that is documents which are submitted to courts. Then good practice research, especially on supported decision-making, relating to Article 12 is important. And then also any kind of working paper for working groups by academic institutions also has a big impact on the committee members. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Theresia. I think it's really important for us to hear from directly inside the committee what is helpful to you. That saves everyone time, and we have not too much time left to prepare our work. So it's really valuable for us to hear your perspective. I'm going to hand over now in a moment to Hege Orefellen from We Shall Overcome, which is a DPO of users and survivors of psychiatry in Norway. And Hege has been through this process, not only for the CRPD, but for other conventions as well, and is very practiced at dealing with the UN bodies and indeed with the ways that the governments interact with them. But we're really privileged to have Hege here to share with us your experience of working on the list of submissions to the list of issues for Norway. So over to you, Hege.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes.
So my name is Hege Orefellen, and I'm the international representative of We Shall Overcome, a Norwegian DPO run by and for users and survivors of psychiatry, established in 1968. We Shall Overcome advocates for the human rights of users and survivors of psychiatry, the implementation of the UNCRPD, and bringing forth psychiatric practices and other infringements in the mental health system to an end. The organization is a member of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, an international organization of users and survivors who has special consultative status with ECOSOC. We Shall Overcome works on both national and international levels. And human rights monitoring and reporting to international human rights mechanisms is an important...
Slow it down a small bit just so I can keep up with the interpretation, please.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Is an important part of our work. And we have been reporting to the UN Human Rights Council for the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR, the UN Human Rights Committee, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the UN Committee Against Torture, the UN CRPD Committee, different UN Special Rapporteurs, and the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and the Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner, to mention some. And in 2018, we reported to the UN CRPD Committee for the list of issues for Norway. Oh, my slide is not changing. Okay, there. And our report is to be found on the link on the bottom of this page, and you can also find the reports if you go to ohchr.org and to the CRPD committee, and then to Norway under session 20 in 2018 and session 21 in 2019, and also you can find the reports under the 10th pre-session in 2018 where the list of issues were adopted. And here you can also find our report for the review of Norway, the parallel report, and the reports of the Norwegian Civil Society Coalition, which consisted of 125 DPOs, NGOs. And We Shall Overcome was also part of the coalition reports. And as you can see from the UN webpage, We Shall Overcome was the only DPO to have its own report in addition to the report of the coalition. I think that if you represent a constituency of persons with disabilities that are especially disadvantaged or marginalized, and or if you are bringing forward human rights issues that are highly urgent and important and would otherwise not be included in the coalition report, or would not be brought forward with the details and attention required, you should address these issues in a separate report. And 4 psychiatric interventions are severe and systematic human rights violations that need to be addressed and brought before the CRPD committee. And if not possible through a joint report, then persons with psychosocial disabilities, users and survivors of psychiatry should bring it forward in their own report. And that is also one of the main reasons that we wrote our own report. And if you look at the rules of procedure of the CRPD committee, you will see that it is expected that written submissions will refer to the progress made so far in the implementation of the CRPD and main implementation gaps and areas which require particular attention. And that it is suggested that written contributions also refer to persons with disabilities who are at disadvantage or are experiencing challenges in the enjoyment of their rights. And as has been mentioned, references to data and statistics are encouraged. And if you look at the guidelines on the participation of DPOs in the work of the CRPD committee, you see that the committee recommends that written submissions start out by identifying the submitting organization with a brief description of its activities at international and or national level, the mission and the role played by persons with disabilities in the organization and in the drafting of the submission. And that is what we did in the beginning of our report. And then you make reference to specific articles in the CRPD and suggest questions to pose to the state party, which has also been mentioned. And for the parallel report, that you propose recommendations for the concluding observations. And in our report, we covered the articles that are most relevant and important to us, and that is articles 1 to 6 and 12 to 17, as well as 25D on the right to free and informed consent to medical interventions. And I will show a few examples of how we did this reporting. So under articles 1 to 4, purpose, general principles and obligations, one of our headings are saying declarations made upon ratifications of the CRPD. And I know this is relevant for you as well, because Ireland holds almost exactly the same interpretive declarations. And there under this heading, we first give a short description of the problem and earlier recommendations that Norway has gotten through the UPR and from the Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe. And then we propose a question, and we try to keep them specific, precise, and detailed formulated. And so for this topic, our suggested questions for the list of issues is, please provide information on any plans to repeal Norway's interpretive declarations on Article 12, 14, and 25, and why these declarations are still upheld despite being in violation of the object and purpose of the Convention. And then if we go to Article 6, Women with Disabilities, we have several suggested questions for the list of issues. And the first one we suggested was, please provide gender disaggregated data on the use of electroshock, ECT, including ECT administered without free and informed consent, given that women have a substantially lower seizure threshold than men and might be more exposed to permanent brain injuries of ECT. Please provide statistics on the number of women who have applied for compensation for injuries caused by ECT to the Norwegian system of patient injury compensation, and the number of cases where compensation was awarded. Please also provide gender-specific data on ECT injuries, type of injuries, and how such data are systematically collected. And of course, we knew when we suggested this that these statistics does not exist in Norway, but we wanted some focus on that and for the government to be held accountable for the lack of such collection of data. And the next question we suggested was, how many women with disabilities have been subjected to abortion and/or sterilization without free and informed consent since the entering into force of the current legislation authorizing these interventions? And then the last one was, what steps are taken to repeal all legislation allowing for the administration of abortion, sterilization, and any other procedures impacting on the sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls without their free and informed consent? And then if we get to Article 12, I will just do a few more examples, and the rest you can look into our 2 reports and the 2 coalition reports also for more information and all the suggested questions and everything else we have in there. So I will just do this one more article just as an example. And there for Article 12, we suggested as questions, what steps are taken to repeal outdated discriminatory legislation and practices restricting legal capacity of persons with disabilities? What steps are taken to develop laws and policies to replace regimes of substitute decision-making by supported decision-making, which respect the person's autonomy, will, and preferences? And please provide information on steps taken to remove functional capacity standards throughout Norwegian law. And the last one, please provide information on any plans to abolish involuntary protection measures for adults and plans to abolish incompetency to be held responsible, as well as security measures based on criminal non-responsibility. And finally, I have just a few tips from our experience. And the first one is, I think it has been mentioned already, to remember to provide the written submissions in accessible formats, for example, Microsoft Word. And the next one is try to get a few other organizations to endorse your report, for example, international umbrella organizations. Coalitions get more speaking time during the briefing with the CRPD committee than single organizations. So if you are a single organization, try to get more organizations behind your report. And then lobby your issues in Geneva and find out which members of the committee that is specifically interested and knowledgeable in your topics, and request individual meetings. We have found that very valuable. And then remember to get accreditation before going. Register for the session in the UN database Indigo. And in the end, I just want to say all the best of luck with the important work, and I hope you get the questions and recommendations you need to help move the CRPD implementation forward in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hege. That's really valuable and great tips there for any of us that are planning to develop submissions about how to make them have the maximum impact. So at this point, we're just going to take a 5-minute comfort break. And when we come back, we're going to have a Q&A session for about 20 minutes, or maybe 30 minutes, I think we had said for the Q&A, sorry. We have a Q&A box so that people can ask your question anonymously. Oh, sorry, I'm just being corrected about who's next in the lineup and that I am skipping ahead. I'm sorry, we're not going to Q&A next. When we come back from our comfort break, we will have Karen from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission talk about their plans. And after that, I'll tell you about how the Q&A will work. But of course, in the meantime, feel free to continue posting questions. You can ask them anonymously if you wish by typing into the question and answer box. Okay, so we'll take our 5-minute comfort break now and see you all in 5 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone. So now I'm going to hand you over to Karen Murphy from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission to talk about the work that IREC is doing on preparing for the list of issues and its own submission. So over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Eleanor, and good morning, everyone. Eleanor, you might just confirm there that you can see my slides.
Yes.
Thanks very much. So yeah, thank you so much to all the speakers so far. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what our own plans here in IREC are. So I suppose just for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Karen Murphy. I work on the UNCRPD team here in IREC. And for anyone who isn't very familiar with us, we are the National Human Rights Institution and Equality Body for Ireland. And we are also the designated independent monitoring mechanism for the UNCRPD in Ireland. And that's a provision that comes from Article 33 of the UNCRPD that mandates all state parties to nominate an entity or entities within the state that will be an independent monitor. So as the NHRI, we part of our role is to monitor and report on the state's compliance with all of the treaties to which it's bound. But as the independent monitoring for mechanism for the UNCRPD, this puts sort of like an extra layer, I suppose, of attention on that. And so I suppose for ourselves and for all of you, our interest in reporting and engaging with the list of issues stage is to provide the committee with an accurate picture of how the state is implementing the convention. I think it's really important to engage at the list of issues stage because it gives all of us an opportunity to be more familiar with the reporting process, especially since Ireland hasn't been before the committee before. So this is for this particular committee, it's a first. And also just to hold the state to account. And for ourselves here in IREC, we're very mindful that the state hasn't been reviewed yet and won't be for a couple of years to come. So this is an opportunity to put something on the record in the here and now. We've already heard from Eleanor and from Teresa and Hege about the different ways you can engage and how to approach that. And I suppose just to let you know that from our perspective, we're available to support with in any way that we can to support civil society, whether you have questions about your own individual written submissions, questions about how to approach the verbal briefing if you have an opportunity to give a verbal briefing to the committee. And I suppose importantly for us as well, we will write our own report as the IMM, the independent monitoring mechanism, and we very much want that report to be informed by the experiences of disabled people, and we're very interested in hearing from individuals and in particular organizations such as DPOs and any other civil society organizations that, you know, that have something to contribute to strengthen our analysis. I suppose we've heard from Eleanor and Teresa already about the importance of suggesting specific questions and providing reasons and evidence. And in our own submission, we're particularly interested in hearing about and providing information on areas of deficit and challenges and barriers, especially looking at what the state has provided in its own report in 2021 and looking at, you know, what has transpired domestically since then. Also, we're very interested in new and emerging issues and developments, and we'd encourage, you know, if you're writing your own submissions, to think about these areas as well, and broader contextual issues as well. So I suppose just being aware that there may be things happening, you know, domestically that aren't, you know, maybe they're not things we kind of typically associate with the CRPD or top of our minds when we think about the rights of disabled people, but they may have a disproportionate impact on disabled people. Just moving along. So just to say a little bit about our own submission. So we're informed by our own strategic priorities here in IREC, and we're also approaching this from a position of, you know, we have over the last 10 years done extensive work on the CRPD in IREC. So we do have a lot to say on all of the articles in the UNCRPD, but we have committed in our current strategic plan to spotlighting particular issues. And those are access to justice, the right to independent living, and the rights of people deprived of their liberty. So we intend to spotlight in particular those issues in our own submission. And as I said, we want to be informed in this regard by consultations with disabled people, including through their representative organisations. And to make sure that we can do that, we have a couple of different events coming up, which we want to put on your radar. So we have an event next Tuesday, which will be online from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m., which will be about the right to independent living. If anyone has not received an invitation to that and would like to, I'll provide our email address at the end, and you can write to us directly, and we'll send you on the details for that. But to give you some information, this will be a sort of a roundtable event online. So, you know, it'll include breakout rooms and group discussion on issues of importance related to the right to independent living. And we're particularly interested in hearing about issues related to personal assistance and financial independence. These are areas that have been highlighted to us by our Disability Advisory Committee and others as being really critical issues. We also will have an event then on the 9th of May, which is for disabled people's organisations specifically. That would be national organisations and also local or grassroots organisations or groups. And we're mindful that while we know many of the groups and organisations around the country, there are others we don't know. So again, if you are part of a group or a network and you identify as a disabled person's organization or a disabled person's representative organization and you haven't heard from us about the event on the 9th of May, please get in touch and we'd love to hear from you. That event will be an opportunity to talk about those three spotlighted issues that I mentioned: access to justice, the right to independent living, and the rights of people deprived of their liberty. Just before I move on, just to mention as well, in addition to these standalone events, we have in IREC, we're very fortunate to have a disability advisory committee made up of experts with lived experience and extensive knowledge that advise us on law and policy in the state as it relates to disabled people. And we also have had consultation and will have further engagement with our disability advisory committee on this issue. And of course, other ad hoc engagements arise as well. And I want to flag as well other supplementary activities that are sort of ongoing in the background for us. Teresa in her presentation referenced the role of the state in facilitating DPOs and, in particular DPOs, I suppose, civil society generally, but in particular DPOs, to engage directly with the reporting process, including to be able to travel to Geneva, engage with the committee and so on. So we want to let you know that that's something that we're advocating for, as the independent monitoring mechanism as well. And we have, IREC has written to senior officials in the Department of Children, Equality and Disability about this recently. This isn't something new. We've been saying this for years, but just to let you know that we've reiterated that again. And certainly at a technical working level, it's something that we raise on a regular basis as well. We also have produced some short guidance, which is published on our website. The link to it is embedded in these slides, so this will be circulated afterwards. And I can pop that in the chat to be shared with the group as well. This is just some short guidance that you might find useful as you're sitting down to do work on submissions of your own, if you are thinking about doing that. And then just to let you know that our own team here in IREC is available to answer any questions that you have to the extent that we can, or if we can, find the information from someone else and get back to you, we will. So you'll have an email address for our team, and feel free to use it. I also want to highlight something additional, which is that there are other opportunities as well to have your voices heard and to raise issues of importance that are relevant for the UNCRPD and the rights contained in it. For example, Ireland will be reviewed by the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women this summer. It's anticipated to take place in June. IREC is currently preparing its own submission to that, and we have produced civil society guidance as well for any organisations that want to engage with the CEDAW committee. So just to let you know that's another avenue in particular, like for example, if the issues that you're concerned about relate to disabled women, that's a second avenue. So you don't need to rely just on the CRPD committee. There are other human rights committees, and as everyone I think in this webinar knows, the rights in the CRPD cut across all other human rights treaties as well. So I'd encourage you to be aware of other reporting opportunities. And just like with the CRPD, you can engage with those committees directly yourselves, or there's usually opportunity to engage with IREC's submission as well and to inform IREC's analysis in the same way as you can with the CRPD. And I just wanted to highlight then as well that next year IREC will be starting to prepare its submission to the UN Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So again, we'd be really, really keen to make sure we have a very strong intersectional lens for all of our reports. And no doubt there are very particular issues related to racial discrimination that intersect with disability as well. So just finally, I'll share this afterwards. The email address for the UNCRPD team here at IREC is crpd@irec.ie. I have included also on this slide the email address for the committee secretariat in Geneva and a link to the guidance that we've produced for civil society, as well as an easy to read version. And finally, there on this slide, there is a link to guidance from the International Disability Alliance, which is really, really comprehensive and could be very valuable for DPOs that are preparing a submission. So I'll stop sharing there, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, Karen. Great to hear about IREC's plans in the run-up to this process now as well. And also very important to remember that this is not the only human rights convention where we can raise issues that are related to the rights of persons with disabilities. So important to hear about the others as well. Okay, so we're going to enter the Q&A portion of the webinar now, and I can see we have a number of questions already in the Q&A box. And I'll just explain how we're going to approach this so everyone is clear. So what we'll do is I'll go through the questions that have been written in the box so that I'll read them out, and we'll pass them to the various panelists who will be in the best position to answer each one. So if there is anyone for whom the Q&A box is not accessible, you can press the raise hand button and we can enable your camera and mic if you need to, for example, sign your question to our interpreters. So I'll begin with some of the questions that we have already received, and please feel free to continue adding your questions. I do want to remind people that we are recording the questions this time. I won't use the names of the people who've asked the questions, but I just want to have the questions included on the recording for those who couldn't make it today, so that when they listen back, they'll hear maybe their questions answered as well. So one question we have is whether is it better to disseminate the one-pager with suggested questions and priorities with the committee ahead of the sessions by sending to the Secretariat, or in person in Geneva? So I think, Theresia, I might ask you to respond to that from your perspective.
Thank you for that question. I would bring it to Geneva and hand it over, because the Secretariat is flooded with so much information, and you get so many emails, and that is it's easier to have the one page handed over by a person and have a face to it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Theresia. We also have a question about how can civil society organizations get access to the state report. So it is public and it's on the UN website. We might just drop a link to that into the chat of this webinar as well, so that everyone can access it. And that question also asks about any examples of reporting to the Committee on Unemployment among Disabled People, or having questions made to the government about actions to provide access to jobs to disabled people and removing discrimination they face to get a decent job. So I know employment comes up a lot, Theresia, in the questions to the committee. And so I'm sure there are plenty of examples that you can find in other submissions, whether they're to the list of issues or alternative reports, parallel reports, shadow reports, with all of those titles. If you just search for Article 27 on work and employment, I'm sure you'll find lots of suggested questions to other governments, which we can get inspiration from for Ireland. I can see, Karen, maybe you want to come in on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor. I just wanted to mention that on the International Disability Alliance website, they have done something incredibly helpful, which is that they have compiled documents. They have compiled the concluding observations of the committee to date under each article. So if you're interested, for example, in Article 12, you can find a document which has the concluding observations of the UNCRPD committee to every country that has been reviewed to date. So you can really get a sense of the issues that are important to the committee and the types of things that the committee has focused on in the past. So I'll put a link to that website into the chat, and maybe we can share it afterwards as well. It's just really helpful resource.
That's great. Thanks very much, Karen. So I hope that answers that question. We also have a question about how long does a state like Ireland have to submit a written response to the issues from the committee? Is there a penalty for late submission, even if Ireland does not recognise the human rights of its disabled citizens, which is 24% of our population? So Theresia, maybe you can tell us if you remember if there's a deadline for the state to respond to the list of issues.
Usually there is, and but at the same time, we know that there's a lot of backlog, and there is. I don't think there is a penalty, but most countries who want to give a good impression in the international arena, they try to be in time or almost in time. But usually there is a deadline by which the state party has to respond, and it is given by the Secretariat.
Great. Thanks very much, Theresia. So we also have a question about what role can non-DPO civil society organizations play in the non-DPOs to team up with DPOs, or should they provide separate submissions? So I might begin with you again, Theresia, and then I might also ask Hege to provide a view on that one as well.
By non-DPOs, you mean NGOs like Amnesty International or Greenpeace? So more general?
I guess, or could also be maybe parents groups
Okay.
or other
Yeah.
organizations. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a number of countries where non-DPOs made their own submissions. But it is always very important to first try to make a coalition with DPOs and give to, I mean, whatever comes under an umbrella, and where DPOs and especially people with disabilities, self-advocates have the majority and are in control, then that is what the committee listens to, because for too long disabled people have been spoken for by other people, by non-disabled experts. So yes, especially to parents organizations, the committee listens, but it is always useful to be in a coalition with DPOs, or saying, at least if you do your own submission, we have consulted with so-and-so.
Thanks, Theresia. Hege, do you want to add to that from your experience in Norway?
Yes, with our experience, as I said, we had this big coalition report with 125 organizations, and there were some of these organizations that were not that didn't fulfill the criteria to be a DPO, which had, as you said, parents and service providers and a mixture. So between the 125 organizations, there were also some NGOs that were not DPOs. But I think it's very important to specify all of this in the report and clarify. And with Visual Overcome, we are a DPO, so we had a single report in addition.
Thanks, Hege. We have a question about how can a new charity organization go about getting accreditation? I presume that's to attend the session in Geneva. Also, to manage expectations, can you guide us as to the primary stipulations and whether this is a lengthy or cumbersome process? So again, I think that might be referring to the process of registration in order to attend. Now, Hege, I know you mentioned that We Shall Overcome has ECOSOC status. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how you obtained that and whether it was difficult. But groups can attend without ECOSOC status if they just register for the sessions as well, is my understanding.
Yes, Visual Overcome does not have ECOSOC status, but the World Network of Users and Survivors. So we are a member organization of that. And it's mostly important when you are doing speeches at the Human Rights Council, because there you need the ECOSOC accreditation, but for the CRPD committee it's not necessary. So I think it's a quite easy procedure to just register in this database, the Indico, and then you ask for accreditation and you get that from the Secretariat. I've never had any problems with that, and you usually get the accreditation very fast. So yes, it's just a small formality.
That's great. Thank you, Hege. We also have a question about whether is there a similar resource for CEDAW as there is for the CRPD that IDA did, which you mentioned, Karen. So I don't know if, Karen, you know if there is one for CEDAW also that goes through all of the concluding observations for the countries.
I'm not familiar. I'm not sure if that exists. I might try to find that out, and if there is, maybe we can send it out with the information afterwards. But IREC has also produced some civil society guidance, so if anyone is interested in producing something for the CEDAW CEDAW shadow reporter submission in advance of the session, that information's on our website.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So we have a question about, is there a difference between the shadow report and the submission of the list of issues, or is this the same thing? So Theresia, maybe you would like to start with that one. Yes,
there is a difference. The shadow report is actually usually has the same length as a state party report, which is at least 20 pages and more, sometimes 400 pages. which is not appreciated by the committee members, 400 pages. But so the report covers every article, whereas the list of issues is much shorter, and it might cover every article. It depends on the reporting cycle you're in. And in the beginning, you cover every article, but it's much shorter. It's preciser, and it goes to the questions. Like if you put down the state body report and you ask yourself, what is missing in this? What is the information missing? And this needs to be put into questions like, please give us information on. And sometimes in order to make something which is sounds very wonderful, like governments usually say all of our disabled children are educated in mainstream, in inclusive ways. And then you say, please give us the number of children in mainstream regular education receiving reasonable accommodation, or give us the number of kids who go to special schools and as compared to, so you make it more clear what are the statistics.
Thanks, Theresia. We have some questions about the process in Geneva as well, about whether it's accessible, the process in Geneva, to disabled people. And from my experience, it's quite accessible in terms of the captions and sign language interpretation and interpretation into different languages, and the physical infrastructure of the UN building. Now, the one that's used now is there is better accessibility. But I don't know if you want to comment on that as well, Theresia, for anyone who's planning to attend in person.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the committee has been trying to do the best as they can to meet all accessibility needs. Like even if people cannot be in the room, then there's a separate room we sometimes provide, and then bring them in via video. And we have started also providing information in easy read language. Of course, there's never enough resources for that. But I think it is quite accessible, and
yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Theresia. There's also some more practical questions about hotels in Geneva and accessibility in general, which I think is slightly more challenging than within the UN, but it is possible at least. So I think that probably just requires a little bit more looking, but it is certainly possible. We have a couple of questions for IREC, Karen, so I'm going to bring you in for these. So we have some questions about whether IREC will fund any travel for people who want to go to do the verbal submission. That we also had a question about whether people could get personal assistance, and their assistants then, would they need accreditation to go and support the person in Geneva? And we also have a question about concern being expressed about the lack of open public consultations in respect of the UN Convention. For example, with the last ICCPR and the shrinking of civil society space, particularly for survivors of psychiatry, to highlight issues to IREC and participate actively in such reviews. So maybe you could take those questions together, Karen, about the role of IREC.
Yeah, sure. We don't have a budget to fund civil society to travel to Geneva, and it's our view that that is an obligation, that's a state's obligation, and we, continuously express that and call for funding to be made available. And we also have made it really clear that any funding that is made available has to be meaningful and has to take into account all of the reasonable accommodations and supports, including personal assistants and support workers. So that's our position on that. Just on the question of accreditation for personal assistants, that's actually not something I have an answer to, and perhaps others on the call do, but that's something we can look into and try to find out more information on, but I don't have that answer right now. And as for the concern with regard to public consultations, yeah, the questioner is welcome to get in touch directly at our email address at crpd ihrec, which is ihrec.ie, and engage with me directly on this if they wish. But I suppose just to reiterate that we do have 2 consultations coming up, one next Tuesday and one on the 9th of May. And we are open to hearing from people directly as well. I can't actually comment on the ICCPR report previously because I wasn't in IREC at that time, so I don't have the institutional memory of what occurred at that time. But the other thing that I can let you know as well is that when we approach this and start to do our own research, we are very much looking at all of the submissions that have come to us in recent years, including in advance of developing our strategic plan last year. So we would have had submissions from a wide range of organisations, including including submissions that were of relevance to Article 12 and Article 14 of the CRPD, and we have those. We take those as very valuable. We treat that as very valuable information. We do try not to ask people the same question over and over and again. So on the one hand, we want to create a space and an open forum for consultation and engagement, and on the other hand, we are very mindful of people's time and the burdens that we place on it when we invite people for a consultation. But I suppose in short, I would say please get in touch directly if you feel you have something to say, or that there is a group or there is an issue that that we need to hear about, and we'll be very open to that.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So we have a few more questions about how the process works. So some of the questions are about whether there's any sanction effectively for Ireland for failing to uphold the CRPD and implement it to the standards that the committee requests. And I guess the short answer is no hard sanctions in terms of there's no financial penalty, there's no recourse, I guess. We're working within the arena of the UN mechanisms where the UN will tell Ireland what it needs to do better, and Ireland may do that or not do that, and then 4 years later we start the process again. But I don't want people to think that therefore there's no point in participating in the process, because like we've talked about, Ireland and many other countries really value their reputation on the world stage and at the UN. And so it is embarrassing for Ireland to be found in violation of human rights standards. And that can be picked up on in different ways by the media, by continuing to use it to advocate with politicians at the domestic level. So I don't know if either Theresia or Hege want to comment on that as well, about even though it's not, I suppose, a hard sanction, what is it that can come from states not continually failing to implement the convention?
I think what you are aiming at is very good concluding observations, which you can use in further lobbying and policy lobbying at home and also at international arena. And yes, there are no sanctions because the concluding observations and all the committee can do is giving recommendations. But you can use it in other treaty body dialogues. You can use it within the dialogues with the Human Rights Commission, and at home. You can use it when you do public events and cite from the concluding observations. That is what you are aiming for.
Great. Thanks, Theresia.
I just wanted to add it's the things you have already said. It's the important things, but I think to use the concluding observations to create momentum is that you have to do that after you get the concluding observations, and that is the biggest impact of it. And I just wanted to share one good example for Norway, because you said earlier that you hadn't incorporated the CRPD into Irish domestic law, and we had the same problem, and we advocated that with the CRPD committee, and we have also done it with other committees and the UPR. And now finally Norway has decided to incorporate the CRPD into the Human Rights Act, and it will have a precedence if it's conflicting with national legislation. So I think it is an example that it can have an impact.
That's great, because we did actually get a question also about how can we lobby for the CRPD to become enshrined in Irish law and incorporated into Irish law. So it's perfect. You already addressed that. So thank you, Hege, for that. So I think that is really important, and I'm sure many of us here today would be very passionate about trying to work to achieve that. Alongside, again, I don't think that simply passing an act that is called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act will suddenly transform the actual realities of disabled people day to day in Ireland. I think a lot more work is necessary, but these are some of the tools that we can be pushing alongside all of our other efforts to try to advance disabled people's rights. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I'm keeping on top of the questions because there's quite a lot to go through. There's a question about whether access to education for deaf people with disabilities, is that, or no, for people with disabilities in general, is that a priority for Ireland in terms of topics to address to the committee? So Article 24 is the article on inclusive education, and that is certainly an area where groups can make specific submission to the committee on that if it's a priority area for them. You will see what the state has written about it in its state report, and you might be able to provide more information and context as to whether that reflects people's experiences on the ground. We have a question about the adoption of the optional protocol, which I just want to address. So again, because Ireland has now ratified the optional protocol, and I didn't talk about this in the main presentation, but the optional protocol is an extra part on not the main text of the convention. And if a country ratifies this optional extra, then it means that if a person in Ireland has taken a case before the Irish courts to try to get their rights under the convention and they have not been successful, they have the option to take that case to the UN committee in Geneva. And the UN committee can decide if Ireland has violated the person's rights under the convention. But the person still does have to go through the process of taking their claim in Ireland before they can go to that UN process. I think, Karen, you want to come back in on that.
Sorry, Eleanor. I think I accidentally put my hand up. Apologies.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. That's okay. So yeah, that Ireland has now ratified the optional protocol, so it is active. But again, it's not a solution to the day-to-day problems that people are facing, but it's another tool, and it's important for people to know that you can't use that tool unless you have at least tried to bring your claim through the Irish courts first and not been successful. So again, there are a lot of barriers to people bringing that kind of litigation, not least of which are financial resources. So that's something we have to think about very carefully. Okay, let's see. There's a question, or a comment rather, about the importance of smaller, less funded voices and issues being raised as they are continually overlooked, lack visibility and funding. So I think that relates back to what you were saying, Hege, about the importance of, marginalized groups within the broader disability community making their own submissions and joining with others when they can to amplify their voice and make sure that those submissions reach the UN committee and are really prioritized. But I do think, Theresia, as well, you would say that the committee is always interested in hearing from more marginalized people with disabilities in its processes. So I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yes, I wanted to say that despite me saying that it is always important to have a coalition and to speak with one voice, the committee is very well aware that there are groups which are marginalized, and that it is, when it comes to disabled women or psychiatric survivors, the committee has always been very open to extra submissions from them and hearing them and giving them time in the briefing session.
Yeah, great. And actually, while I have you, Theresia, I'll keep you, because there's another question about the outcome under the optional protocol. So where the committee hears an individual complaint or communication under that protocol, what can the outcomes be? There's a question about whether that can involve individual compensation or some form of sanction on the state?
Again, the committee is not a court. It can only give views and recommendations, but they are sometimes very powerful. We have had a case where we stopped a death penalty on someone, at least for some time. And there is sometimes it takes a long time to get the full view instead of early intermediate suggestions from the committee, which are very urgent and which are put forward directly to the state. That is often not public because, and you will hear about it later on, but the views are also published on the committee website. And I have often heard that the views have been taken up by courts at the national level or at the regional level. So they are not court decisions, and so they cannot be sanctions like court decisions, but they are authoritative statements.
Great, thank you, Theresia. There is a question about coordination among groups that might want to go to Geneva. So the example given is during CERD, so that's the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination that Karen mentioned earlier, that there was a group coordinating those organizations that from civil society that went to Geneva. And there's a question if anything similar is being planned for disabled people's organizations and other organizations going to Geneva. So there's not something that I'm aware of, but Karen, I might bring you back and see if you want to comment on that, or Jackie, indeed, from the beginning of the webinar, if you have any thoughts on that as well.
I don't have any information on something similar, and I have asked our colleagues at the Department of Children, Disability and Equality whether there are any plans to fund or make available something similar, and I haven't got a clear response on that I can share. So unfortunately, I'm not aware of any, and yeah, I'll hand over to Jackie in case there's anything from her end.
No, I mean, what I would say is that the GPO network, which is the network of the 5 national member organizations, have been working quite closely for the last 2.5 years with the department, the lead department in Ireland, around the development of our own national disability strategy, which is due to be launched probably before the summer recess of the Dáil Éireann, which is our national parliament. So in that context, the department will be very well aware that we are up for engagement, not only nationally, but also internationally, obviously at UN level, because that's our raison d'etre, if you like, of the GPO network. So they would be aware of that, and it certainly would be our expectation. But to be perfectly honest, we haven't even got anywhere near. We never had a dialogue about that meeting in Geneva, because we don't even have a date. Is it 2028? You know, a lot can change in 3 years, as we've seen in recent weeks, not mind months or years. So the world is moving quite rapidly, for good and for bad at the moment. So that's the frank and honest answer. But in principle, yes, we would definitely have an expectation that there would be involvement of GPOs at Geneva in probably 2028. And funded,
just,
obviously. Like obviously, we currently don't have 1 cent. We operate on fresh air at the moment, and all of us are giving our time voluntarily at the moment.
Okay, and I think it's just important to reiterate that there's 2 possibilities of going to Geneva. There's going to Geneva in September this year for the list of issues, which is a possibility if groups can manage to get themselves there. And there's going to Geneva in the future when for the final part of that dialogue between the government and the committee itself. So I guess most groups focus on that final stage because that's, you know, the one where you have both the government present and the committee asking questions. But not to discount, I would say, if people can manage to do it for the list of issues, because as Hege has said as well, it can be really valuable. And I think when you engage with the committee members at that early stage and they learn the issues, that's really helpful for the committee members before they go into the dialogue with the dates in that
it's
later
certainly
point as well.
something, and we would consider it for sure. Let's get our submission in first,
Yeah.
which we have every intention of doing. And once we have a clarity around the date for those meetings in Geneva in September, I think, you know, assuming there will be funding or support to attend, the GPO network, I'm sure, would be open to having at least 2 or 3 delegates there.
And I wonder if Hege, so the dates of the pre-sessional working group are set now from the 1st to the 5th of September. So that's a piece of information I should have given in the main presentation.
Oh,
So
very
good
good.
reminder.
Well, I didn't know that now. That's
Sorry,
new
that's on
information
me.
for me. Yeah, great. Thank
So
you.
I do think it's maybe for Hege to come in and talk about how, you know, Norwegian DPOs manage that coordination at the various stages when you're in Geneva and how that works, if you have anything you want to add on that.
Yes, and you usually get the information sheets from the committee to see the exact time of the briefings and all the information you need for the procedures to be there. And then you have, which we have used also a lot of times, you have the opportunity to also arrange more you can arrange side events with the committee on specific topics, and we have done that in addition. We have also had informal lunch briefings, and with the list of issues, we were there because we thought it was important to be there already then, but we were a bigger delegation for the actual review of the state. So at the review of the state, we were a very large delegation. Many members of the coalition, and then we were 3 people from Visual Overcome there as well. So I think that in itself created a big momentum for working afterwards, and also for the cooperation in the future on all the recommendations we got. It was very important to have a big delegation there and to continue with that work afterwards.
Great, thanks, Hege. So just for clarity again, because there's another question about what's happening in June, is it just the list of issues or the shadow reports? So shadow reports can be made at various stages of the process. Like once the state has submitted its state report, organizations can do what are called shadow reports. But what's happening in June is the UN committee will write the list of in June, people have a deadline if they want to tell the UN committee what they should write to the Irish government. And so you can produce a shadow report for that if you wish, but you can just produce a submission for the list of issues. And that can just be very focused. The shadow report is often much broader. It has things like all of the concerns on each of the articles. And as Theresia said, they can sometimes be extremely, extremely long. Whereas a submission for the list of issues is focused. It has questions that we would like the committee to ask the Irish government when they write that list of questions, which they will do in September. So I hope I've been clear on that now. Okay, so hopefully we've answered most of the questions. There's 1 or 2 more that I haven't gotten to that I'm going to try and get before I move on to the next and final part of the webinar. So there is a question for you, Jackie, about the DPO network and engagement with users and survivors of psychiatry. So what measures has the DPO network taken in that respect? Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. We're very happy to engage, and indeed we have a number of members to one of our member organizations who are active using survivors of psychiatry, and their voices are very central to our work. So that is the first answer. And if that is a person who would like to get involved, I would point them in the direction of ILMI, the Independent Living Movement of Ireland, who are one of our active members, and they have a nucleus, a cell, if you like, of people who are engaged in that area and actively contribute to the work of the DPO network. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Jackie. We also have a question about the role of IREC in bringing a case through the Irish courts. So Karen, I'm going to go to you for that one.
Yeah, thanks for that. So just to mention, first of all, that IREC has an information service called Your Rights, whereby an individual who has a concern that they themselves may have experienced discrimination, they can access information on what avenues may or may not be available to them. But just on IRIC more generally, so our powers include a range of functions for supporting strategic litigation. So we can apply to the High Court or Supreme Court to appear as an amicus curiae in a case involving human rights or equality. We can provide practical assistance, including legal assistance directly as well to individuals to support them to vindicate their rights. And IRIC can also institute proceedings itself and take a case directly. So, for example, IRIC took a case in its own name to vindicate the rights of people living in asylum seekers coming to Ireland who were not being accommodated late last year. That will be kind of an example of that. And IRIC also has the power to carry out equality reviews and prepare equality action plans where there is where organizations may not be treating people equally. So you can find out more information on our website and contact the Your Rights Service if the case is an individual one.
Great, thanks very much, Karen. I'll just kind of end with the last two things that have come in, and then I'm going to tell you about an event that's happening in June. So we have a question about are there issues pertaining to different human rights instruments scheduled differently every year? CEDAW has a different timeline from that of the UNCRPD. So yeah, I suppose each of the treaty bodies have their own scheduling, even though the reporting is kind of, I suppose, supposed to happen for every convention on a similar timeline, which is states ratify, they have 2 years to produce their report. Then we enter into the process for development of list of issues, reply, dialogue, concluding observations. But sometimes states are very late doing one or the other, and then they clash. So it's kind of, it's unusual, I think, for us to be doing CRPD and CEDAW now in the same year. We normally don't have so many convention reporting processes happening at once, but it can happen. And finally, there is an offer of support. So someone is asking if it's possible for a non-disabled person who's a researcher from another country to offer support to DPOs. And I can't speak for DPOs, so I will ask Jackie your views on that one, if there is support that DPOs might need. And I'm sure there are lots of other representatives of DPOs attending as well who might be willing or interested in getting support from others.
Yeah, we never say no to anything that's offered free, and especially for somebody, if they're an expert in the whole area of research, always very welcome. They're very welcome to log on to our website, dponetwork.ie. And there are 2 email addresses there, and they can contact me directly on chairperson@dponetwork.ie if they so wish to follow through further with that offer. And we'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so that concludes our Q&A. I hope there might have been some questions that I didn't get to. I apologize if I missed any. There was a lot of activity in the question box, so I hope I got through everything that people submitted. So I'm going to just take the last few minutes of the webinar to tell you about some work that we are planning to do in Galway and how people can get involved in that if they are also developing a submission to the list of issues. I don't know why I have lost the files that I wanted to share. Just bear with me a moment while I try to get my slides up and running again. Okay, I'll try one more time. Okay, if it doesn't work, then I can always just talk about it without having the slides up. Oh, I think it's here now. All right, so hopefully you can see those, and I'm going to tell you about the event that we're having in Galway in June. So as many of you know, we run our annual International Disability Law Summer School in June, and it will indeed be running again this year from the 16th to the 18th of June. But after that event, we are planning to do something else. So on the 19th and 20th of June, we are planning to hold an in-person event in the University of Galway to support groups that are trying to develop their submissions for the list of issues. Just one moment. So we have a small amount of funding that we've received to run this workshop, and therefore we can give some support for groups that might need help funding their travel and accommodation to be with us in Galway, but we have very limited places for this event. So the idea is that we thought we would use this funding to support organisations that are drafting their submissions for the list of issues. We will give priority in that to disabled people's organisations. So that is organisations that are run and controlled by disabled people, organisations with a national scope, and organisations that don't have any core funding for their activities. This is not an event for service providers, and it's not an event for individuals. So we are prioritising working with groups, and we want to have a wide range of perspectives represented. So if you are interested in taking part in that event, we are launching now, and we will be putting the link into the chat of this webinar as well, a call for expressions of interest. So if you're interested in attending, we will need to know some information about your organisation, your areas of interest, what parts of the CRPD or topics or issues are you working on or prioritising, and whether you're interested in collaborating with others. So we are hoping that this can also be a space where groups can get together and work together to develop joint submissions if they have common issues that they want to bring forward to the CRPD committee. So we have a deadline of the 8th of May for groups to submit their expression of interest. We will select those that we can fund by the 15th of May and let you know if you've been successful in getting funding for your travel and accommodation to attend. We do ask every organisation to send 2 applicants, 2 representatives of their organisation. It's very hard for all of this to fall on one person, and we think it's better if that kind of can be distributed a bit and have 2 people to work on the submission. And given the information that we've received, which is that it will be the end of June will be the deadline for making your submission to the UN, then we will really need to be using the Galway event as the final polish on your submission to the UN, and helping people to really concentrate and focus and put that together, and providing a dedicated space and resources in terms of our own staff and colleagues at the Centre for Disability Law and Policy that can look over the submissions that people have drafted, give pointers, give advice, and help people to get them ready and make them as impactful as they can. So once we've told people if they've been successful, we will expect you to let us know if you're definitely coming by the 22nd of May and give us the names of your attendees. And then before you arrive, we need you to do your homework and send us your draft submission by the 8th of June so that we have time to review it, get some feedback ready for you, and plan how we're going to work with you over the 2 days in Galway. It will be starting late morning, probably around 11 on the 19th of June, and it will end probably at lunchtime on the 20th of June. So we're still working on finalising the agenda, and we'll hopefully have some of our summer school speakers that we've convinced to stay in Galway for a few extra days to help us out with this. So we're hoping to have some extra support around, and we thought what better way to use it than to support groups who are trying to hold the government accountable before the UN, and this is how we've decided to do that. And we hope that it will be useful, and that this is something that groups will benefit from. So that is our plan. And again, if there's any, I suppose, final. Oh, sorry, someone has we have a few questions about this, I think, maybe. Who are viable for this opportunity in terms of location? I'm not sure. So like, again, it should be groups that are based in Ireland. And we have funding for groups to travel from whatever part of Ireland they are in to Galway and to stay in Galway while we do this workshop. I think there is someone who has a hand up who mightn't to ask a question that maybe couldn't access the Q&A. Is that right?
I think it's Joe McGrath, I think.
Joe, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Can we enable Joe's microphone so he can ask a question?
It's enabled.
Okay, it's enabled. So Joe, did you want to ask something?
I found that the presentations that everybody give this morning were very interesting, and I would like to ask, how did they manage to get people interested in gathering the information from disabled people in their countries, and how did they engage? How did the people stay engaged for so long?
Yeah, so maybe that's a question for Hege about how did We Shall Overcome get people involved in the process of trying to use the UN to hold Norway accountable?
Yes, I think for both the We Shall Overcome, but also the big coalition, it was several or many meetings working on this for a long time. And we had specific working groups on specific topics. And for the big coalition, I think it was 10 separate organizations, but then it was 4 umbrella organizations, and one of them is a huge umbrella organization. I think it has 84 organizations or something. So obviously it's a lot of coordination, and to have a democratic process and having all the boards involved in the final decisions and so on. It was a huge process. I was working on the We Shall Overcome report, and I had other colleagues that were working with the coalition. So I don't know what to say other than we arranged a lot of meetings, and we had working groups on specific topics, and we just kept going for a very long time.
Thanks, Hege. Okay, so with that, I think we will thank all of our fantastic speakers this morning for their participation. It's been really helpful to hear, particularly from our international colleagues, about how we can use this process effectively. And so really thank Theresia and Hege, as well as great to have Karen and Jackie with us this morning to talk about these issues as well. So we will be following up with everyone who has attended. We have recorded this, so a link will be made available to the recorded version. And we just have to thank as well our interpreters for today, Lisa and Amanda, and our captioner Elaine, for superb work to make today's event accessible to everyone. And I hope we'll hear from many of you to send your expression of interest if you want to join us in Galway for our workshop. I just asked Jackie to stay on the line. We just have one small tech issue that we need to resolve once everyone has left the webinar, and I'll keep the interpreters and captioner for that as well. Thank you all very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to today's webinar. It's an absolute pleasure to co-present and to be involved with CDLP in Centre for Disability Law and Policy in the National University of Galway here in Ireland, and with the IREC, which is the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission in Ireland, the independent monitoring mechanism overseeing the implementation of the CRPD. So I'm the chairperson of the DPO network, and the DPO network, we're a network of 5 national organisations of persons with disabilities here in Ireland, and we work together because we share values around the implementation of the UNCRPD in Ireland. That's our raison d'etre. That's why we exist. So the 5 national member organisations of disabled persons organisations, or in some countries they're referred to as organisations of persons with disabilities. So 5 member national organisations are As I Am, which is an autism organisation, Disabled Women Ireland, the Independent Living Movement of Ireland, the Irish Deaf Society, and the National Platform of Self-Advocates. So we obviously work from a human rights model of disability, and it's an absolute pleasure that today's webinar is happening, and we feel very proud because it was us that approached both CDLP and IREC to run an event such as this, which we see is critical to enabling the involvement of disabled people directly in developing the list of issues for the UNCRPD Rights Committee in Geneva. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Is that okay?